247 Zarkonian warships blotted out the twin suns of New Plymouth. Below them, 40,000
Taking fire,
civilians
shields
were
at
sealed in the
40%.
dark-breathing recycled
Enemy
air
at 2 o'clock.
that tasted of
Firing
copper and
counterbombing.
ash.
I
was
made
no
a promise to
cavalry
bring
waiting
you
in the
all
wings.
home,
There was
and I
no
intend to keep
reinforcement
it.
fleet on the radar. The colony was cut off, outgunned, and out of time. Or at least that is what the alien empire believed. The sky burned.
Keep
a
moving!
deafening
Don't
crack
stop!
split the atmosphere.
Control
Orbital
roar!
plasma strikes rained down on the colony's primary agricultural domes. Glass shattered in million-piece mosaics. Steel girders melted into slag. From the ridgeline overlooking the burning settlement, Dr. Eris Thorne watched 20 years of human sweat and engineering vaporize in less than 20 seconds. She did not weep. There was no time for tears. "Keep moving," Ares shouted, her voice raw, cutting through the wail of air raid sirens. "Do not look back. Keep your hands on the shoulder of the person in front of you." The dirt road leading up to the northern caves was choked with humanity. Men and women, young and old, their faces smeared with red dust and soot. They were farmers, mechanics, teachers. Now they were prey. Above them, the Zarkonian landing craft descended. They looked like massive obsidian insects dropping from the clouds, their anti-gravity drives emitting a low rhythmic thrum that rattled the teeth in Eris's skull. This was not a war. It was an extermination. Just 72 hours earlier, in a vaulted chamber light years away, the Galactic Council had convened. Beings of light silicon and ancient flesh had gathered to discuss the anomaly of the human race. A young species, a violent species, a species that had learned to crack the atom before they learned to stop killing each other. The High Counselor had warned the Assembly to leave the humans alone. They were unpredictable. They built weapons out of tools and turned barren rocks into fortresses. Warlord Vrax had laughed. Standing in the center of the council floor, the Zarkonian commander had sneered at the cautious elders. His carapace gleamed like polished gunmetal. His empire spanned 1,000 worlds. To him, humanity was a joke, a brief spark in the dark that needed to be snuffed out before it could spread. He did not wait for a vote. He did not ask for permission. Before the council session even adjourned, Vrax had transmitted a single encrypted command to his vanguard fleet: eradicate them. Now Vrax stood on the command deck of his flagship, the Obsidian Crown, looking down at the blue-green jewel of New Plymouth. His compound eyes narrowed with cold satisfaction. The planetary defenses had crumbled in exactly 14 minutes. The human militia, armed with outdated kinetic rifles and sheer stubbornness, had been wiped off the map. "Warlord," his tactical officer hissed, mandibles clicking in the stillness of the bridge. "The surviving humans have retreated into the subterranean cavern network. Scans indicate heavy natural shielding. Our orbital lasers cannot penetrate the bedrock." Vrax did not turn around. "Let them hide. Target their atmospheric processing plants. Destroy the water filtration hubs. If we cannot burn them out, we will suffocate them. The universe belongs to the strong." Deep underground, the heavy titanium blast doors of the northern caves slammed shut. The locking mechanisms engaged with a heavy final thud. Inside, the darkness was absolute until the emergency amber lights flickered on, casting long skeletal shadows across the cavern walls. Eris leaned against the cold stone, gasping for breath. Her lungs burned. Her hands, usually steady when handling microscopic exobiology samples, were shaking uncontrollably. She forced herself to breathe. In, out. She was the ranking official now. The governor was dead. The militia captain was dead. 40,000 terrified eyes were staring at her in the gloom. "Dr. Thorne." A young voice broke the silence. It was an engineering apprentice, barely 18, clutching a cracked datapad to his chest. "The primary scrubbers. They didn't survive the EMP blast. The secondary filters are choking on the dust from the orbital bombardment." Eris closed her eyes. She felt the weight of the mountain pressing down on her shoulders. "Give me the number, son. Just the math." The boy swallowed hard. "We have 40,000 people down here. At our current rate of oxygen consumption, the air turns toxic in 12 hours. After that, hypoxia sets in. We just go to sleep. 12 hours. Half a day. That was the exact measure of their lives." Eris looked out over the sea of faces. Mothers hushing crying infants. Old men leaning on makeshift walking sticks, their faces set in grim acceptance. These were pioneers. They had crossed the void of space to build a home, and now they were going to die in a hole in the ground. Get the quantum entangled transmitter online, Eris commanded her, voice dropping to a low hard register. We bypass standard subspace frequencies. We send a tight beam burst straight to Earth Defense Command. Doctor, the interference from the Zarkonian fleet is massive. The message will be fractured. And even if they hear us, Earth is too far. Nobody can jump here in 12 hours. Eris stepped forward, grabbing the boy by the shoulder. Her grip was iron. You let me worry about the distance. You just punch the signal through. Do it now. She turned away, looking up at the cavern ceiling as if she could see through the miles of rock, past the alien war fleet, and into the black expanse of the Milky Way. Please, she thought, please be listening. Millions of miles away in the freezing silence of deep space, the United States ship Aegis cut through the dark. She was a leviathan of titanium ceramic armor and focused nuclear fury. She was not a colony ship. She was not an explorer. She was a dreadnought built for the sole purpose of reminding the galaxy that humanity did not negotiate with bullies. On the bridge, the lights were dimmed to tactical blue. The air was crisp, smelling faintly of ozone and recycled pine. There was no chatter. There was only the low hum of the tactical consoles and the quiet professionalism of men and women who knew exactly what they were doing. In the center of it all sat Captain Kaylin Vance. She was 45 years old with silver creeping into the dark hair tied tightly at the base of her neck. Her uniform was immaculate. Her posture was rigid. She possessed a stillness that unnerved younger officers and inspired absolute loyalty in veterans. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. When Kaylin Vance spoke, the room listened. Captain. The voice belonged to her executive officer commander, Elias Trent. He stepped up to the command chair holding a steaming mug of black coffee. The mug was chipped at the rim, a veteran of 3 different deployments. He held it out to her. Kaylin took it, wrapping her fingers around the warm ceramic. Thank you, Elias. Status of the patrol. Quiet, ma'am. Too quiet. Long-range sensors are picking up unusual subspace echoes near the frontier sectors, but nothing concrete. Kaylin took a slow sip of the coffee. Bitter, black, exactly the way she needed it. The frontier is never quiet, it just holds its breath. Suddenly, the communications console chimed. It was not the standard ping of a subspace relay. It was a harsh, rhythmic tone that cut through the silence of the bridge like a physical blow. The communications officer, a young lieutenant with sweat suddenly beading on his forehead, spun around in his chair. Captain, Priority 1 override. Quantum entanglement relay is receiving a tight beam burst. It's highly degraded massive interference, but the origin point it is verified. Kaylin set the coffee mug down on the armrest. Her eyes locked onto the main view screen. Origin point, New Plymouth Colony, ma'am. A cold silence fell over the bridge. New Plymouth was a peaceful agricultural hub. There was no military presence there to justify a Priority 1 burst. Put it on the main speakers, Kaylin ordered. Clean up the audio as much as you can. The bridge filled with a wash of static. Then through the hiss and crackle of cosmic radiation, a voice emerged. It was a woman's voice, tight with fear, but laced with an undeniable stubborn strength. Repeat, this is Dr. Eris Thorne. New Plymouth has fallen. Zarkonian Armada. 200+ vessels. Defenses destroyed. We have retreated to the northern caves. Civilian casualties are heavy. Our air scrubbers are dead. We have 12 hours of oxygen remaining. Please, if anyone is listening, we have 12 hours. The message looped the static, swallowing the final words. 12 hours. Kaylin Vance did not blink. She stared at the black void on the view screen. The numbers began to run through her head, cold and unforgiving. Tactical, Kaylin said, her voice terrifyingly calm. Bring up the fleet disposition of the Zarkonian Armada. The screen shifted, displaying a tactical map of the New Plymouth system. A massive swarm of red icons hovered over the blue planet. 247 ships, cruisers, destroyers, orbital bombardment platforms. It was a fleet designed to conquer star systems. Engineering. Kaylin continued, not taking her eyes off the red swarm. Calculate the jump distance to New Plymouth. I need to know how long it takes to spool the FTL drive. Deep in the bowels of the ship, the chief engineer's voice came over the intercom. It was rough, pragmatic, and heavy with regret. Captain, we're talking about a multi-sector jump. Standard safety protocols require an 18-hour charge cycle for the reactor. If we push it, maybe 16. Any faster, and the containment field won't hold the dark matter cascade. 16 hours to jump, 12 hours of air. The math was a death sentence. By the time the Aegis arrived, they would be skewing corpses. Commander Trent stepped closer to the chair. His voice a low whisper meant only for her. Kalen, it's a slaughterhouse. We go in alone against 200 ships, we don't walk out. And even if we do, we arrive 4 hours too late to save the people in those caves. Command protocol dictates we fall back, rally the main fleet, and launch a counteroffensive. Kalen picked up her coffee mug. She took another sip. She looked at Elias Trent, a man she had served with for 15 years. A man who knew the regulations inside and out. A man who was entirely correct. Logic dictated they hold the line. Logic dictated they let New Plymouth burn to save the rest of the fleet. But humanity did not reach the stars by relying on logic alone. They got there on grit, on defiance, and on an unbreakable promise made to one another in the dark. When I took command of this vessel, Kalen said, her voice carrying across the silent bridge, I swore an oath, we do not leave our own behind in the dark. Not today, not ever. She pressed the comms button on the armrest. Chief Engineer, strip the safety limiters on the FTL reactor. Bypass the primary containment protocols. The intercom crackled. Captain, if I strip the limiters, we run the risk of a core breach. We could blow ourselves into atomic dust before we even break orbit. I understand the risks, Chief, Kalen replied, her tone leaving zero room for debate. Overclock the reactor. I want a firing solution and a jump vector in 6 hours. You give me the speed, I will give you the shield. Understood, Captain. God help us. Engineering out. Kalen stood up from the command chair. She smoothed the front of her uniform and turned to face her bridge crew. Every eye was on her. They were men and women who had families, homes, lives waiting for them back on Earth. She was about to ask them to throw it all into the fire. Listen to me, Kalen said, her voice ringing out clear and steady. Right now there are 40,000 people suffocating in the dark. They are terrified. They are praying for a miracle. They think the galaxy has forgotten them. We are going to remind the Zarkonian Empire why you do not touch our people. She walked toward the tactical hollow table, slamming her hand down on the glowing surface. We are jumping into the teeth of a 200-ship armada. We will be outgunned. We will be outnumbered. Some of us will not be coming home. But we are going to draw every ounce of fire that alien bastard has to offer, and we are going to hold the line until those people can breathe again. She looked at her helmsman. Set coordinates for New Plymouth. She looked at her weapons officer. Warm up the rail guns. Prep all nuclear torpedo tubes. She looked at her executive officer. Elias, sound general quarters. Let's go to work. The bridge erupted into controlled, calculated action. Alarms blared, bathing the corridors in red light. Blast doors slid shut. Munitions were loaded into firing chambers with heavy metallic clangs. Deep within the ship, the massive FTL reactor began to howl a terrifying, unnatural sound as it was pushed far beyond its design limits. Captain Kalen Vance sat back down in her chair. She looked at the view screen, watching the stars stretch and distort as the Aegis prepared to defy the laws of physics. She picked up her chipped mug and finished the cold, bitter coffee. Hold on, Eris Thorne, Kalen thought. We are coming. The air inside the northern caves was turning to poison. It did not happen all at once. It was a slow, creeping thief. It started as a dull ache behind the eyes. Then it became a heaviness in the chest, a quiet desperation that made every breath feel like drawing water through a cracked straw. Dr. Eris Thorne wiped a streak of black grease from her forehead. She stood in front of the primary ventilation manifold, a hulking rusted machine that had been designed to filter dust, not orbital fallout. The machine was rattling. It sounded like a dying animal coughing up metal. Beside her, the young engineering apprentice Tommy was frantically tapping a cracked data pad. His fingers were trembling. A bead of sweat dripped from his nose onto the glass screen. The particulate density is too high, Tommy whispered, his voice cracking. The orbital strikes kicked up a dust storm of irradiated silica. The secondary scrubbers are clogging. They're tearing themselves apart. Iris stared at the red warning lights flashing on the manifold console. She didn't need a data pad to know what that meant. She could feel it in her own lungs. Give me the new timeline, Eris said. Tommy swallowed hard. He didn't look up from the screen. We don't have 12 hours anymore, Doctor. The scrubbers are failing exponentially. We have 8 hours, maybe less if the dust settles thicker. 8 hours until the carbon dioxide levels reach lethal toxicity. 8 hours. Iris turned slowly, looking back at the cavern. 40,000 people. They were huddled in family groups on the cold stone floor. A mother was pressing a damp cloth over her infant's mouth, trying to filter the stale marsh air. An old man sat quietly in the shadows, his eyes closed, clutching a silver cross to his chest. They were waiting for a rescue that was mathematically impossible. Don't tell them. Eris said softly. Tommy looked up, his eyes wide with panic. But doctor, they have a right to know. If you tell them we just lost 4 hours of life, panic will set in. Eris interrupted, her voice a low, steady iron bar. Panic increases heart rates. Increased heart rates consume more oxygen. If they panic, 8 hours becomes 4. You keep your mouth shut, son. You keep working on that manifold. We fight for every single minute. She patted his shoulder, a heavy grounding touch, and walked away from the machine. She needed to check the perimeter. High above the suffocating dark of the caves, Warlord Vrax sat upon the obsidian throne of his flagship. The command deck was vast, bathed in the cruel crimson light of Zarkonian tactical displays. Below him, the blue jewel of New Plymouth was scarred with glowing, angry red craters. He was bored. Conquest was only thrilling when the prey fought back. These humans had crumbled. Their planetary defenses were a joke. Their militia was ash. Now the survivors were hiding in the dirt like vermin. Status of the subterranean targets, Vrax rumbled. His voice was a deep, guttural click that vibrated through the floor plates of the bridge. His tactical officer, a scarred veteran with missing mandibles, bowed deeply. The rock is dense, Warlord. Our orbital lasers dissipate before penetrating the primary civilian bunker. But thermal imaging shows their heat signatures. They are trapped. Trapped is not dead, Vrax sneered. He leaned forward, his armored carapace grinding against the throne. I want to hear them scream. I want their despair broadcast on open frequencies so the rest of this pathetic galaxy understands the price of defiance. Deploy the breachhounds. The tactical officer hesitated. Warlords sending ground troops into confined spaces? It is dangerous. The humans might have trapped the entrances. Vrax stood up. He towered over his officer, a monument of lethal insectoid armor. Are you afraid of dirt farmers with mining tools? Send the hounds, burn the doors down, slaughter the adults, bring me the children to serve in the lower decks. Do it now. The order rippled down through the fleet. In the belly of the Zarkonian cruisers, heavy dropships detached from their magnetic clamps. They plummeted toward the atmosphere, carrying squads of heavily armored shock troops. The hounds, 8 feet tall, heavily augmented, carrying thermal plasma repeaters that could melt through a tank chassis. They hit the dirt road leading to the northern caves with the force of a localized earthquake. Inside the cavern, the ground shuddered. Dust rained down from the ceiling. Eris felt the vibration through the soles of her boots. She stopped dead in her tracks. The low rhythmic thud of heavy ordnance striking the outer titanium blast doors echoed through the tunnel. Boom! The crowd of civilians went dead silent. A child whimpered. Boom! The outer doors groaned. The locking mechanisms screamed in protest. The Zarkonians were not waiting for them to suffocate. They were coming in. Iris ran to the front of the tunnel. 4 remaining members of the colony's volunteer militia were already there, crouching behind overturned cargo crates. They were terrified. They held their kinetic rifles with white-knuckled grips. They were farmers and mechanics, holding weapons they barely knew how to fire. Fall back to the secondary choke point, Ares ordered, sliding in next to a grizzled older man named Miller. We can't fall back. Doc, Miller grunted, his eyes fixed on the massive steel doors 30 yards ahead. The center of the metal was already glowing a dull, angry orange. Once they breach that door, they have a straight shot into the civilian camp. We hold them here or we die here. Eris looked at the door. The orange circle was expanding. The metal was bubbling, turning to liquid slag under the intense heat of Zarkonian plasma torches. She wasn't a soldier. She was an exobiologist. She spent her life looking through microscopes, not down the barrel of a gun. But she was an American, and she was a human being, and she would be damned if she let alien monsters butcher her people without a fight. She turned and sprinted to a stack of mining equipment against the tunnel wall. She grabbed a heavy industrial plasma cutter. It weighed 40 pounds. It was designed to slice through granite bedrock. She hoisted it up her muscles screaming and dragged it back to the barricade. She rested the heavy barrel on a crate, aiming at dead center at the melting door. When that door falls, Iris said, her breathing heavy, her finger hovering over the industrial ignition trigger. You do not stop firing until your magazines are empty. The steel door gave way with a deafening screech. A massive molten hole blew inward, spraying liquid metal across the stone floor. Through the smoke and the blinding glare of the breach, the Zarkonian hounds stepped into the tunnel. They were terrifying. Hulking masses of black armor and red glowing optical sensors. They raised their weapons. "Ruff!" Eris screamed. The cavern erupted in a deafening roar of kinetic gunfire. Sparks flew off the Zarkonian armor. The militia's bullets barely dented the heavy plating. A hound raised its weapon and fired a burst of plasma. The man next to Eris vaporized into a mist of red and ash. Eris squeezed the trigger of the mining cutter. A blinding, sustained beam of blue-white industrial plasma shot from the heavy tool. It wasn't a weapon, but heat was heat. The beam struck the lead hound square into the chest. The alien armor designed to deflect quick pulses of military energy could not withstand the sustained million-degree burn of a deep-core mining tool. The hound shrieked a horrifying metallic sound as the beam burned clean through its chest plate and out its back. It collapsed, a smoking husk of black armor. The other hounds paused, shocked by the sudden brutal resistance. "Keep firing!" Eris roared, her vision blurring from the heat and the smoke. Millions of miles away, the United States ship Aegis was tearing itself apart. Captain Kalen Vance stood on the command deck, gripping the railing in front of the view screen. The entire ship was vibrating violently. The overhead lights flickered, struggling to draw power. The air smelled of burnt ozone and melting copper. Deep in the engineering bay, the chief engineer was fighting a losing battle against the laws of physics. They had stripped the safety limiters. They were pushing the dark matter reactor to 120% of its rated capacity. It was a caged sun screaming to break free. "Hull integrity is dropping, Captain," the tactical officer shouted over the deafening groan of the ship's bulkheads. "Microfractures detected in Deck 4. The containment field is fluctuating. If it drops for even a microsecond, the reactor will consume the ship." "Hold the field," Kalen commanded, her voice cutting through the panic with absolute chilling calm. She did not sit down. She did not flinch. "I need that FTL vector." Commander Trent stood next to her. He was sweating profusely. He looked at the countdown timer on the main display. 10 seconds to critical mass, Kalen. If we don't jump now, we become a localized supernova. Kalen stared at the timer. 9, 8, 7. She thought of the voice on the radio. Dr. Eris Thorne, a civilian holding the line in the dark. 6, Thorne. "Navigation is the solution locked?" Kalen asked. "Lock it, Captain, but it's a blind jump. We are coming out of slip space directly inside the New Plymouth gravity well. Right on top of the Zarkonian fleet. We will have zero time to adjust." 4, 3. "We don't need time," Kalen said. "We need violence." 2, 1. "Punch it." The stars on the view screen stretched into long, blinding white needles. The Aegis groaned a massive, agonizing sound of tortured titanium. And then the fabric of reality fractured. They did not travel through space. They ripped a hole in the universe, stepped through, and pulled the void shut behind them. Over New Plymouth, Warlord Vrax was watching the live feed of his hounds breaching the human caves. He watched with dark amusement as the humans fought back with mining tools. It was pathetic. It was almost sad. Suddenly, the Zarkonian proximity alarm screamed. It wasn't a warning beep. It was a chaotic, blaring klaxon that signaled immediate catastrophic danger. "Warlord!" the sensor officer yelled, his voice cracking with unprecedented panic. "Massive spatial rupture detected in Sector 4, inside our own formation." Vrax whipped his head around to the main display. "Impossible. No ship can exit slip space inside a planetary gravity well without ripping itself apart." What? The void shattered. It was not a clean exit. The Aegis burst into real space like a breaching leviathan, surrounded by a shockwave of displaced dark matter that sent three Zirconian destroyers spinning out of control. The human dreadnought was massive, scarred, and trailing a vent of burning plasma from its overworked engines. On the bridge of the Aegis, the sudden deceleration threw half the crew to the deck. Sparks showered from the overhead conduits. The main lights died, replaced instantly by the harsh, bloody glow of the emergency red tactical lighting. "Damage report," Kaylin barked, pulling herself up by the railing. "Reactor containment held, but the FTL drive is completely fused." Engineering shouted over the comms, "We are dead in the water, Captain. We cannot jump out. We are stuck here." Kaylin looked at the view screen. They were surrounded. Zarkonian warships blotted out the stars on every side. They had dropped right into the center of the Hornet's nest. 200 enemy ships, one human dreadnought. "We are exactly where we need to be," Kaylin said, her eyes narrowing into cold, predatory slits. "Tactical. Drop the safety limiters on the weapon banks. Give me full spread on all railgun batteries. Flood the tubes with the nuclear yield. Fire at will. Targets, ma'am. All of them." The Aegis erupted. It was a display of firepower that defied logic. Human railguns did not use elegant energy beams. They used electromagnetism to accelerate solid tungsten slugs to a fraction of the speed of light. They were brutal. They were kinetic. They did not melt armor. They shattered it. The first volley of tungsten slugs slammed into a Zarkonian heavy cruiser off the port bow. The kinetic impact was so massive that the alien ship literally snapped in half its spine, broken venting atmosphere, and screaming aliens into the cold vacuum. Torpedo tubes vomited nuclear fire into the dark. A Zarkonian frigate tried to turn and run. A nuclear warhead caught it amidships. The flash blinded the sensors for a fraction of a second, and when they cleared, there was nothing left but expanding radioactive dust. "Port batteries continuous fire," Kaylin ordered, pacing the command deck. "Roll the ship 15 degrees. Bring the starboard railguns to bear on that dreadnought. Hit them before they realize what we are." For 5 glorious, chaotic minutes, the Aegis was untouchable. She was a brawler in a room full of fencers swinging a sledgehammer in the dark. Zarkonian ships burned and shattered, their elegant formations broken by the sheer, unadulterated savagery of the human assault. But there were too many of them. Warlord Vrax recovered from his shock. His mandibles clicked with absolute fury. "Concentrate all fire on that primitive vessel. Overwhelm their shields. Do not let them breathe." Hundreds of Zarkonian energy lances struck the Aegis simultaneously. The human ship shuddered violently. "Shields at 70% and dropping fast," Trent yelled over the din of battle. "Captain, we are taking fire from all quadrants. We can't hold this position." "Keep the guns firing, Elias. Every ship we kill up here is a ship that can't shoot at the ground." Kaylin gritted her teeth. She knew the math. They were buying time with their own blood. Then the tactical officer's voice pitched up in alarm. "Captain, the Zarkonian flagship is deploying a secondary vessel. It's massive. It's moving toward the planet's atmosphere." Kaylin looked at the display. A specialized, heavily armored ship was detaching from the alien armada. It was descending toward New Plymouth, extending a massive glowing array from its belly. "Scan it," Kaylin ordered. "Spectrometers indicate massive thermal buildup." "Captain, it's an atmospheric incinerator. If that ship reaches the upper stratosphere, it will ignite the oxygen in the atmosphere. The surface will burn. The caves will become ovens. It will cook everyone underground in minutes." Kaylin felt a cold spike of dread in her chest. She had brought her ship across the galaxy. She had sacrificed her FTL drive. She was taking fire from an entire armada, and it still wasn't enough. The Zarkonians were going to burn the colony to ash. "Intercept course," Kaylin ordered. "Bring us between that ship and the planet." "We can't move, Captain Sublight. Engines are offline from the FTL burnout. We are a stationary target." Kaylin slammed her fist onto the console. For the first time, a crack of frustration showed in her iron exterior. She was out of options. She was out of time. Then a localized priority channel cut through the battle static. It was an encrypted quantum line direct from Earth. It bypassed standard comms and piped directly into Kaylin's earpiece. "Captain Vance, The voice was heavy with age and the terrifying burden of command. It was President Robert Hayes calling from the command bunker deep inside Cheyenne Mountain in Colorado. "Mr. President," Kaylin replied, not taking her eyes off the descending incinerator ship. "We are engaged, heavily. They are moving to burn the atmosphere. I need backup. I need the fleet." "The fleet is 3 days away, Kaylin," the president said, his voice grave. "You are alone, but we are tracking the battle telemetry. Dr. Sterling has the Arcturus array fully charged." Kaylin's heart leaped. Arcturus, the superweapon. A gravitational lensing cannon built in Earth's orbit capable of firing a focused beam of dark energy across light years. It was the ultimate trump card. "Then fire the damn thing, Sir. Target the incinerator ship." "We can't," the president said, the word hitting Kaylin like a physical blow. "The FTL jump shockwave from your vessel scrambled our remote targeting telemetry. Arcturus is blind. We have a gun that can shatter a moon, but we have no way to aim it at New Plymouth. If we fire blind, we might hit the planet. We might hit you." Silence hung on the line. The bridge of the Aegis shook as another volley of Zirconian plasma pounded their failing shields. Kaylin looked at the tactical map. She looked at the incinerator ship slowly crawling toward the atmosphere. She looked at the swarm of red dots surrounding her own ship. A cold, terrible realization settled over her. The math of command. It always came down to the math. "Mr. President," Kaylin said, her voice dropping to a quiet, terrifying calm, "if Arcturus is blind, it needs a beacon." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. President Hayes was a smart man. He knew exactly what she was saying, and he hated it. "Kaylin, no, the only signature strong enough for Arcturus to lock onto from this distance is an unshielded dark matter reactor." "My reactor," Kaylin said. "If you drop your shields to broadcast the signature, the Zirconians will tear you to pieces. You won't last 60 seconds. "I don't need 60 seconds, Kaylin said, looking at Commander Trent. Elias met her gaze. He read her eyes. He knew what she was going to do. He didn't argue. He just gave her a single, slow nod. "Mr. President, spool up Arcturus. Prepare to lock onto my coordinates. When I give the word, you fire the beam directly at my ship. We will act as the focal point. We will draw the enemy in close, and you will burn them." "Kaylin, you are talking about the lives of 3,000 men and women on that ship. And you are talking about 40,000 civilians on the ground, sir. We do the hard jobs. That is why we are here." Kaylin stood up straight, adjusting her collar. "Spool the weapon, Mr. President. Vance out." She cut the connection. Down on the surface, Dr. Eris Thorne was bleeding. A stray piece of shrapnel from a plasma blast had caught her shoulder. Her lab coat was soaked in red. She was leaning heavily against the barricade, the heavy mining cutter resting in her arms. The air in the tunnel was thick with smoke and the metallic stench of alien blood. The Zirconian hounds had fallen back, regrouping for a second push. The human militia was decimated. Only Miller and Aris were left standing at the front. Behind them, the civilians were crying softly in the dark. "They're coming back, Doc," Miller wheezed, clutching a hand over a burn wound on his side. "I'm out of ammo." Aris looked at the battery gauge on the mining cutter. It was dead. The heavy tool was just a 40-pound piece of useless metal now. She dropped it. She reached down to the belt of a fallen militiaman and pulled out a heavy steel wrench. It was a pathetic weapon against armored aliens, but it was all she had. She stood up, gripping the wrench with both hands. "Then we make them bleed for every inch," Aris whispered. The hounds marched back into the breach, their optical sensors glowing bright red in the smoke. They raised their weapons. Aris closed her eyes, ready for the flash of plasma. The ground shook. It was not the tremor of a breach charge. It was a massive, sustained seismic rumble that rattled the dust from the ceiling. The hounds paused, looking up. Aris opened her eyes. The low rhythmic thrum of the Zirconian orbital bombardment had stopped. It was replaced by a new sound, a tearing, thunderous roar rolling across the sky above them. "Look," Tommy whispered, pointing toward a vertical ventilation shaft that led to the surface. Through the narrow opening, the pitch-black sky of New Plymouth was suddenly illuminated by violent flashes of gold and blue light. It looked like a thunderstorm, but the lightning was moving in straight lines. Boom! A shockwave hit the atmosphere, vibrating down the shaft. "That's not Zirconian plasma," Miller gasped, staring at the flashes of light. Those are kinetic impacts. Those are railguns. A little girl no older than 7, clutching a dirty stuffed bear, stepped forward from the crowd of civilians. She looked up at the flashes of light, her eyes wide with wonder. "They came," she whispered. The words rippled through the cavern. They came. Earth came. A sudden surge of adrenaline, of pure, unadulterated hope, hit Eris like a physical wave. The Zarkonians were not gods. They were bleeding in the sky above them. One of the hounds, distracted by the orbital battle, lowered its weapon for a fraction of a second. It was all the opening Eris needed. She didn't run. She lunged. She swung the heavy steel wrench with every ounce of strength she had left, driven by fear, anger, and the desperate need to protect the people behind her. The wrench slammed into the side of the hound's helmet, shattering the red optical sensor. The alien roared, stumbling backward, dropping its weapon. In the medical triage area further back in the cave, a different scene was unfolding. A younger, smaller Zarkonian scout had been captured during an earlier skirmish. He was wounded, his leg crushed by falling rocks. He sat propped against the cave wall, his forearms bound by heavy zip ties. He watched the humans with wide, terrified, compound eyes. A human field medic, a gruff woman in her 50s named Martha, was walking down the line of wounded. She stopped in front of the alien. She looked at his crushed leg, then looked at his face. The alien flinched, expecting a blow. He had been taught that humans were savages. Instead, Martha unhooked a dented metal canteen from her belt. She unscrewed the cap. It was filled with the last of their lukewarm, incredibly bitter black coffee. She didn't have water to spare, but a dying prisoner needed something to drink. She held the canteen to the alien's mandibles. "Drink," she grunted. The alien, hesitant, took a cautious sip. The incredibly bitter, acidic taste of human black coffee hit his alien palate. His mandibles flared out. He gagged violently, his eyes watering, looking at the medic as if she had just fed him battery acid. Martha snorted a dark, cynical laugh. "Yeah, I know, it tastes like engine oil, but it keeps you awake. Welcome to Earth, kid." The alien stared at her, bewildered. The humans were fighting like demons at the gate, yet they were sharing their foul, bitter rations with a prisoner. The warlord had lied. These were not mere animals. High above the battle was entering a deadly new phase. Vrax stood on his bridge, furious. The human dreadnought refused to die. It was taking massive damage, venting atmosphere, its armor scorched and blackened, but its railguns continued to spit death. "The human ship is crippling our vanguard," the tactical officer reported, panic edging into his voice. "We have lost 30 cruisers. Their kinetic weapons are bypassing our thermal shields." Vrax slammed his fist into his command console, shattering the glass. "They are one ship. We are an empire. I will not be humiliated by primitives. Signal the reserve fleet. Bring them in." "Warlord, the reserve fleet is garrisoning the outer systems. If we call them here—" "I said bring them in," Vrax roared. "I want the sky black with our ships. I want that human vessel reduced to atoms." Space tore open again, not once but 100 times. 100 fresh Zarkonian warships dropped out of slip space, filling the void with fresh, heavily armed cruisers. They formed a massive, tightening noose around the crippled USS Aegis. On the human bridge, Kalen Vance watched the new ships appear on the tactical display. The screen was a sea of red. There was nowhere to run. There was nowhere to hide. The incinerator ship was only minutes away from the atmosphere. It was time. Kalen turned to Elias. Her face was set in stone. She was a warrior, and this was her final command. "Elias, shut down the shields. Route all remaining power to the reactor broadcast array. Light us up like a supernova." Elias swallowed hard. His hands hovered over the console. He looked at Kalen. "It's been an honor serving with you, Captain." "The honor was mine, Elias. Do it." Elias pressed the sequence. On the outside of the Aegis, the shimmering blue energy field that had protected them from the Zarkonian plasma suddenly flickered, collapsed, and died. The ship was naked, stripped of its armor. At the same moment, the massive dark matter reactor deep inside the hull began to broadcast a raw, unshielded energy signature. To Zarkonian sensors, the Aegis suddenly lit up like a blinding sun on their radar. On the obsidian crown, Vrax laughed. A cold, cruel sound. "Their shields are down. Their reactor is overloading. They have pushed themselves to death. All ships target the human vessel. Vaporize them. 217 Zirconian warships locked their targeting computers onto the unshielded USS Aegis. 217 energy lances began to glow with lethal crimson power, preparing to fire a volley that would turn the human dreadnought into vapor. Kaylin Vance stood on her bridge. She did not brace for impact. She picked up the comms receiver, dialing the direct quantum line back to Cheyenne Mountain. "We are blind, Mr. President." Kaylin said, her voice steady and loud, a defiant roar into the dark. "We are the beacon. Fire Arcturus. Fire the gun." Time stopped. For one agonizing heartbeat, the universe held its breath. Above the scarred atmosphere of New Plymouth, 217 Zirconian warships locked their targeting arrays onto a single unshielded human dreadnought. The United States ship Aegis hung naked in the void, a titanium whale surrounded by a swarm of crimson predators. Her shields were down, her FTL drive was fused. She was broadcasting a blinding dark matter signature, screaming into the blackness of space, daring the alien armada to strike. They did. 217 lances of superheated plasma erupted from the Zirconian fleet. They did not travel as projectiles. They traveled as a concentrated wave of localized extinction. The alien warlord Vrax watched from his throne on the obsidian crown, his mandibles spread wide in a cruel, triumphant grin. He was about to erase the human ship from existence. He was about to turn their defiance into ash. Light years away, deep beneath the granite shell of Cheyenne Mountain, President Robert Hayes stood in the center of the command bunker. The room was bathed in the harsh, pale light of the tactical holotable. Around him, generals and cabinet members stood in absolute suffocating silence. They were watching the live telemetry feed. They were watching Captain Kaylin Vance, and 3,000 American sailors offer themselves up as bait. "Target lock acquired." Dr. Arthur Sterling whispered, his hands trembling over the firing console. His face was pale. The targeting reticle on his screen was centered squarely on the dark matter reactor of the USS Aegis. "Mr. President, we have the beacon." President Hayes did not look at the generals. He did not look at the tactical map. He looked at the audio frequency monitor, visualizing the voice of the woman who had just condemned herself to save 40,000 strangers. "God forgive us," Hayes said softly. His voice did not shake. "Fire." Dr. Sterling turned the key. He pressed the ignition sequence. In high Earth orbit, the Arcturus array awakened. It was not a laser. It was not a railgun. It was a marvel of human engineering in reverse-engineered alien physics, a machine the size of a city block designed to weaponize the very fabric of space. It did not fire a projectile. It folded a localized pocket of gravity, captured the raw, unfiltered energy of the sun, and lensed it through a quantum tunnel directly toward the target coordinates. It was the wrath of a star compressed into a needle. Over New Plymouth, the Zirconian plasma volley struck the USS Aegis. The human dreadnought screamed. Without her energy shields, the titanium A armor plating took the full brunt of the alien fury. The hull did not just melt, it sublimated. Solid metal flashed directly into superheated gas. On Deck 4, the portside munitions bay cooked off, blowing a massive jagged hole out into the vacuum. On Deck 6, the primary life support manifolds sheared apart, venting freezing oxygen and screaming crew members into the dark. On the command bridge, Kaylin Vance was thrown violently to the deck as the inertial dampeners failed. The tactical holotable shattered, raining blue glass across the floor. Emergency klaxons blared their mechanical shrieks, barely cutting through the deafening roar of buckling metal. Beside her, Commander Trent slammed against the bulkhead. His shoulder crunched with a sickening snap. He slid to the floor, blood pouring from a gash on his forehead. "Hull breaches on all port decks," the tactical officer screamed, his hands flying across a sparking half-dead console. "Armor is gone, structural integrity is at 14%, and Captain, we are coming apart." Kaylin dragged herself up. She grabbed the edge of the command chair, her knuckles white, her uniform soaked in her own blood. She did not look at the damage reports. She looked at the main view screen. She looked at the incinerator ship slowly crawling toward the planetary atmosphere, ready to burn the civilians below. "Hold the line," Kaylin roared, her voice tearing through the smoke and the chaos. "Hold the beacon. Nobody moves." The crew of the Aegis held. In the engineering bay, men and women stood in ankle-deep boiling coolant, rerouting power to keep the dark matter beacons screaming. In the gunnery pods, gunners whose targeting sensors had melted manually cranked the heavy railguns, firing blind kinetic slugs into the alien swarm, even as their compartments lost atmosphere. They knew they were dying. They knew the math, but they had made a promise. Then the cosmos shattered. It did not open with a shockwave. It opened with a blinding, absolute silence. Directly behind the crippled Aegis, the quantum tunnel established by the Arcturus array materialized. The beam of lensed stellar energy exited the slip-space rupture. It was a pillar of pure white gold light, 5 miles wide and completely silent. It struck the USS Aegis, but it did not destroy her. Kalen Vance had done the math. The unshielded dark matter reactor of the human dreadnought acted as a refractive prism. The Arcturus beam hit the reactor's gravity well and shattered. The single beam of stellar wrath refracted into 217 individual needles of blinding light, chaining outward from the Aegis like lightning striking a steel rod. The beams tracked the ionized trails left by the Zarkonian plasma volley, snapping back directly to the alien ships that had fired them. On the bridge of the Obsidian Crown, Warlord Vrax's compound, eyes widened in pure unadulterated terror. The white light filled his view screen. It bypassed his thermal shields as if they did not exist. He had spent his entire life conquering lesser species. He had believed with absolute certainty that his empire was the pinnacle of evolution. He looked at the crippled, bleeding, primitive human ship that had just caught the fire of a star and thrown it back at him. "What are they?" Vrax whispered. The Arcturus beam struck the Obsidian Crown. The massive Zarkonian flagship did not explode. It simply ceased to be. The heat was so absolute, so instantaneous, that the molecular bonds of the titanium, the silicon, and the alien flesh dissolved. The ship turned into a rapidly expanding cloud of glowing golden ash. All around the Aegis, the Zarkonian armada vanished. Cruisers, destroyers, frigates. The refracted beams of the Arcturus array pierced them, gutted them, and erased them from the cosmos. The massive atmospheric incinerator ship, hovering mere miles above the stratosphere of New Plymouth, was caught dead center by the heaviest refraction of the beam. It was cut cleanly in half. The two massive halves of the alien dreadnought lost their anti-gravity lift and began a slow tumbling descent into the atmosphere, burning up like twin artificial meteors. In less than 3 seconds, the sky over New Plymouth went from a swarming hive of alien predators to an empty, silent graveyard of glowing dust. The Arcturus beam cut off. Space folded back onto itself. Silence fell over the system. On the command bridge of the Aegis, the emergency red lights flickered and died. The only illumination came from the sparks raining down from the shattered ceiling conduits and the cold starlight bleeding in through a crack in the main viewport. Kalen Vance stood alone in the center of the ruined bridge. Her breathing was heavy, ragged. Her left arm hung uselessly. At her side, the collarbone shattered. Blood dripped from her chin onto the charred deck plating. She looked at the tactical display. It was a blank static screen. She turned slowly, looking at her crew. Commander Trent was slumped against the bulkhead, clutching his ruined shoulder, but he was breathing. The tactical officer was slumped over his console, motionless. The helmsman was sitting on the floor, staring blankly at his hands in deep shock. The air was thick with the smell of vaporized metal, burnt ozone, and copper. "Report," Kalen rasped. Her voice was barely a whisper, but in the absolute silence of the dead ship, it sounded like thunder. Elias coughed, spitting a wad of blood onto the deck. He reached up with his good arm, pulling a secondary data pad from his belt. The screen was cracked, but the internal diagnostics were still running. "The enemy fleet," Elias started, his voice shaking. He looked at the screen, unable to comprehend the numbers. "Captain, the Zarkonian fleet is gone. Total localized obliteration. The incinerator ship is destroyed. The airspace over New Plymouth is clear." Kalen closed her eyes. The tension that had held her spine rigid for the last 3 hours suddenly evaporated, leaving her hollow and impossibly tired. They had done it. They had held the line. "Our casualties, Elias," Kalen said softly. "Give me the button." Elias swiped the screen. The ship's biometric sensors ran a cold mechanical tally of the life signs still registering within the ruined hull. The number flashed on the cracked glass. Elias stared at it. He closed his eyes, letting his head thump back against the cold steel bulkhead. "Decks 4 through 7 took direct plasma impacts before the Arcturus strike," Elias said, his voice hollow. "Munitions Bay 3 is gone. Port engineering is exposed to vacuum. He paused, swallowing the lump in his throat. 142 dead, Captain. We lost 142 souls. Kaylin did not flinch. She did not look away. She absorbed the number, letting it carve itself into her heart. 142 men and women. Kids fresh out of the academy. Veterans who had followed her for a decade. They had trusted her. They had followed her into the fire. Log their names, Kaylin ordered, her voice trembling just slightly. Secure the blast doors around the exposed decks. Reroute life support to the medical bay. And Elias looked up at her. Send a message to Cheyenne Mountain, Kaylin said, looking out through the cracked viewport at the blue-green planet below. Tell them the sky is clear. Tell them to send the rescue shuttles. Down on the surface, the earth had stopped shaking. Inside the northern caves, the absolute darkness was oppressive. The emergency lights had failed 10 minutes ago. Dr. Eris Thorne sat on the cold stone floor, her back against the melted steel of the barricade. She was clutching the heavy wrench in her lap. Her shoulder was throbbing, a dull, agonizing pulse of pain that synced with her heartbeat. She could not hear the Zarkonian hounds. When the sky had lit up with that terrifying, blinding white light, the heavy shock troops had simply stopped. The violent EMP backwash from the destruction of their fleet in orbit had fried their combat uplinks. Cut off from their command structure, cut off from their warlord, the hounds had retreated. They had simply turned around and marched back out of the tunnel, disappearing into the dust storm outside. In the medical triage area, the young Zarkonian prisoner was shaking. His compound eyes were wide, staring at the ceiling. He was muttering something in his native tongue, a rapid clicking chant. Martha, the field medic, shined a small penlight into his face. "What is he saying?" she asked, looking at Millen, who was leaning against the wall, clutching his wounded side. "He's saying the warlord is dead," a voice said from the shadows. Iris stood up, dropping the wrench. She walked slowly toward the front of the tunnel. The heavy blast doors were gone, reduced to a pool of hardened slag. Beyond the opening, the dirt road was empty. The air outside was thick with gray ash. It smelled of sulfur, burnt ozone, and scorched earth. But beneath the destruction, beneath the smell of war, there was something else. A breeze. A cool, natural breeze blowing down from the northern mountains. Aerie stepped out of the cave. Her boots crunched on the ash. She looked up at the sky. The twin suns of New Plymouth were just beginning to rise over the horizon, casting a pale golden light through the lingering smoke of the orbital bombardment. The red swarm of the alien armada was gone. The sky was empty. Then a new sound cut through the silence. It was not the low, terrifying thrum of alien anti-gravity drives. It was the high, screaming whine of atmospheric thrusters. Human thrusters. Eris watched as 3 heavily armored drop shuttles broke through the cloud cover. They were painted gunmetal gray, bearing the stenciled white star of the United Earth Defense Fleet. They banked hard over the burning agricultural domes and descended rapidly toward the ridgeline, kicking up a massive cloud of dust as their landing gear slammed into the dirt. The ramps dropped. Men and women in heavy combat armor poured out, their kinetic rifles raised, sweeping the perimeter. They moved with absolute precision. Behind them came the medical teams carrying stretchers, trauma kits, and portable oxygen generators. A squad leader, a broad-shouldered sergeant with dirt on his visor, ran up to Eris. He looked at her blood-soaked lab coat, at her exhausted, hollow eyes. He lowered his rifle. "Dr. Thorne," the sergeant asked. Iris nodded slowly. She could not speak. Her throat was completely dry. "We're here, ma'am," the sergeant said, his voice softening. He reached out, gently gripping her uninjured shoulder. "The fleet is securing the orbit. The Zarkonians are gone. You're safe now." Iris looked past him. She looked at the medical teams rushing past her, disappearing into the dark maw of the cave. She heard the sound of weeping. Not tears of terror, but tears of absolute profound relief. The 40,000 people in the dark were finally stepping out into the light. "You came," Eris whispered, her voice cracking. "Yes, ma'am," the sergeant replied. "We always do." 2 days later, the dust finally settled over New Plymouth. The fires had been extinguished. The alien dead had been burned in massive pyres outside the city limits. The human survivors had begun the agonizing, necessary work of clearing the rubble and rebuilding their homes. On a gentle, grassy slope overlooking the ruins of Hope's Landing, the earth had been freshly turned. It was a quiet place. The wind blew softly through the tall native prairie grass. The sky above was a clear, brilliant blue. Stretching across the slope were 142 white wooden crosses. They were perfectly aligned, perfectly spaced. They bore no ranks, no titles, just names. The names of the men and women of the USS Aegis who had burned in the dark so that the people of this planet could breathe the air. Captain Kaylin Vance stood at the head of the graves. She was not wearing her dress uniform. She wore her combat fatigues torn at the shoulder, stained with grease and dried blood. Her left arm was strapped tightly to her chest in a heavy medical sling. Her face was pale, the lines around her eyes carved deep by exhaustion and grief. She stood at attention. She did not weep. She was a commander. She carried the weight of their deaths, and she would carry it for the rest of her life. Behind by her stood Dr. Eris Thorne. Eris wore a clean jacket, her own shoulder bandaged heavily. She looked at the endless rows of white crosses. She had spent the last 2 days walking among her people, seeing the children playing in the dirt, seeing the old men sitting in the sun. She knew exactly what these graves had bought. They were so young, Eris said quietly, the wind carrying her words across the grass. They were the best of us, Kaylin replied. Her voice was steady, anchored in iron. They knew the risks. They took the oath. They held the line. Kaylin reached out with her good hand. From the pocket of her fatigues, she pulled a battered, dented metal canteen. It was Commander Elias Trent's canteen. He was currently lying in a med bay in orbit, fighting a raging infection, but he had insisted she take it down to the surface. Kaylin unscrewed the cap. The smell of bitter black coffee drifted into the air. It was cold now, stale. Kaylin stepped forward. She stood in front of the first white cross. The name etched into the wood was Lieutenant James Miller, the helmsman, 22 years old. Kaylin tilted the canteen. She poured a slow, steady stream of the black liquid into the red dirt at the base of the cross. She walked to the next cross, pouring another few drops. She walked the entire first row, sharing the bitter drink with the earth, sharing it with her crew one last time. It was a silent ritual, a soldier's farewell. Eris watched her. She understood. In the face of the vast, terrifying emptiness of the universe, humanity survived not through cold logic, but through these small, irrational acts of profound love. Kaylin emptied the canteen on the final grave. She screwed the cap back on, clipped it to her belt, and stepped back. She snapped a sharp, crisp salute to the fallen. She held it for 10 seconds. Then she lowered her hand and turned to Eris. "My ship is crippled," Kaylin said, looking up at the sky. "The engineering teams say it will take 3 months to patch her up enough to limp back to Earth. We will be staying in orbit until then, to watch the door." "You don't have to," Eris said. "The fleet is arriving tomorrow. The defense platforms are already being rebuilt." "I do have to," Kaylin said softly. "I made a promise to the people in those caves, and I intend to keep it." The news of the Battle of New Plymouth did not just reach Earth. It echoed across the entire Milky Way. In the vast ethereal chambers of the Galactic Council, the ancient beings of light and silicon sat in stunned, terrified silence. They had reviewed the telemetry. They had seen the footage of a single primitive dreadnought dropping its shields, taking the fire of an entire armada, and acting as an anvil for a weapon of unimaginable destructive power. They had watched the Zarkonian Empire, the undisputed military terror of the galaxy, break like glass against the stubborn, bloody resolve of the human race. The warlord was dead. His fleet was ash. Within weeks, the subjugated worlds of the Zarkonian Empire rose up in violent rebellion, shattering the once mighty civilization into 100 fractured, warring factions. The Galactic Council realized their mistake. They had looked at humanity and seen a young, reckless species. They had seen children playing with fire. They had been wrong. Humanity was not reckless. They were fiercely, terrifyingly protective. They were a species that would gladly burn themselves alive to keep the monsters away from their homes. They did not conquer. They did not seek dominion. They just wanted to be left alone to build, to explore, and to live. But the galaxy now understood a fundamental, unbreakable law of the cosmos, a rule etched in the blood of 142 sailors and the ashes of an alien armada. You do not touch their worlds. You do not threaten their people. Because when the dark closes in, when the air runs out, and when you call for help in the endless freezing void of space, humans will come, always.